Hello and welcome to the 495. I am your host, Doug Sparks, Editor-in-Chief of Merrimack Valley Magazine. Lou, how are you doing today?
Doing very well today.
Okay, hanging in there.
Has it warmed up at all out there? Because it was not very warm this morning.
It looked warm.
Yeah, exactly.
It looked warm. It didn't feel warm. In fact, it feels colder, maybe because of the wind. It actually feels colder than the sunshine indicates. Because I went out to play with my kids in the yard, and they were fine with it. And I like the cold. I have no problem with it. But it was a little bit like, maybe I needed to bundle up.
I was looking up this morning, saw all the sun, and I go, boy, it's going to be nice out. And I walked out, and it's got to chill.
Yeah, it's got to happen at some point. It has to, right? It has to warm up, right?
That's what they tell us.
So I hold in my hands, for the first time, I just picked this up myself today, the new issue of Merrimack Valley Magazine.
Wait a second, you picked it up at the office? Or
I picked it up at the office.
Okay.
I went to, we get like a big stack that comes into the office that we can then redistribute, and we also keep some copies in the office and copies for reference.
Did you bring me one?
And then they go out. What's that?
Did you bring me one?
This one is yours.
One? Okay, excellent.
This one is yours, absolutely, sure. I did bring some extra just in case you wanted one, and sometimes I run into people. So it's an interesting issue for a number of reasons. We talked about it a little bit. My letter from the editor, there's me sitting in my garage
shot.
The infamous garage.
Why no hoodie?
No hoodie. So what Lou's talking about is I've been doing Facebook Living from my garage sometimes at night and brewing tea and just kind of talking about whatever I'm reading and talking a little about tea. And one of my friends said that I'm like the Bob Ross of tea. Like it's very kind of, I guess they find it quiet and soothing. And I'm usually wearing this hoodie that I pull down over my eyes.
It's a happy little tea.
Yeah. But I pull the hood over my eyes so I look a little like Gandalf.
Yeah.
Having fun with it. But anyway, so no, in this particular case, I had to wear my my blazer.
Yep.
But yeah, it's a good, it's exciting to see this. And there's this is the article I was talking
Who took
about.
that photo, by the way? It's good.
That's Kevin Harkins. That's Kevin Harkins.
Yeah.
So he actually came in, and we did everything by the book as far as social distancing. So we had a corner of the garage carved out for him. He had a mask on. He was wearing gloves. And then I tried to, organize it so it might look like something. And then we threw in some little details. So if you look at the magazine, you'll see like a crazy friend of mine once gave me a harpoon. I think I might have mentioned this.
No.
So if you look in the background, I actually have my harpoon. There's little hidden details in the picture for people who are inclined to search out those kinds of things.
Yep.
So anyways, we're happy with some really neat stuff in here. Story on Lawrence is really great. Ruby and the Groove, we interviewed. Actually, our last Zoom call was with Ruby and the Groove.
Yep.
So we have a music article called Let the Music Play. That's really neat. And then I did a bunch of book reviews, including Barker House. And today we have the author of Barker House on with us. And his name is David Moloney. David, can you hear me?
How's it going?
Everything, well, you tell me. It's been you were saying before the show started, it's been a crazy 6 weeks when we were talking about what it's like to be a debut novelist. What's it been like for you?
It's not what I expected. So, the book came out in early April 7th. And we had set up, a little book tour to do talks and events at bookstores, some universities, all across New England. And then sort of every day I would get a cancellation email. So everything sort of just got canceled. And so a lot of, it's tough for a debut author to sort of get their name out. And one of the hopes was that people would pick up the book in a bookstore and look at the back and see sort of Elizabeth Strout, Andre Dubus, and they would think, oh, maybe I should buy this book. So I kind of lost that with all the stores closing. So it's been a lot of sort of trying to figure out how to promote a book during a pandemic. It's been challenging. Doing a lot of stuff like this, podcasts, radio shows, Zoom readings, and everyone's trying to sort of change on the fly. So it's been interesting.
Yeah, have you found anything that I mean, I was listening to the book review podcast, which is like the New York Times book review podcast, and they at the end of the podcast they always do something on the publishing industry. And what I've been gathering from that is that big name authors seem to have actually been doing better than expected during this crisis, and then authors such as yourself, younger authors or newer authors have kind of taken a hit. Would you say that's been the case with you? Do you feel like it's been a little bit tougher than it ought to have been?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I can't sell the books at events. I know we put the link up during some of these Zoom readings, but it's just not the same as being able to talk to readers after an event
Sure.
and sign books. And so I think it's been tough. And I know I saw sales were down, across the publishing industry the first few weeks of April, and then they picked up the last couple of weeks. But I think that's being carried. I think I saw young adult and children's books are sort of carrying the 5% increase, and adult fiction, especially literary fiction, is still kind of slagging.
Yeah, although I wonder how long that's going to last because, I know some friends who are reading a lot more right now and people who are interested in literary fiction, and it seems like a really good time to turn off the TV and turn off the news and read a novel or read some nonfiction and exercise your brain in a different way. So I'm wondering how long that's going to last, because it seems almost like if things happen the way they ought to, this ought to be the sort of industry that would thrive in this environment. Why not this, right? You're not serving anybody pizza, right? It's something that makes perfect sense right now for people to be reading books. It calms you down. It allows you to exercise your sympathy with other people. It stimulates the imagination. It does all these kind of great things that television doesn't really do, right? And people always think, I should read more. I should read more. Well, now is the time, right?
Yeah, and I know a lot of my friends who won't claim to be readers, and they'll tell you that they haven't read a book since high school, have been reading my book and, texting me. And I don't think they would have read it unless they were stuck at home.
Yeah.
So I think it's sort of giving people a chance to return the books.
Yeah. How'd you get on? So Bloomsbury, this is on Bloomsbury, and probably the most famous author on Bloomsbury is J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter novels. So this is a big deal. It's a big deal for a local writer, for one of our own, to be on Bloomsbury. How did you get on Bloomsbury?
So I have an agent at Trident Media Group, which is a pretty big talent agency in New York. And when we were ready to start shopping the book to the publishers, Bloomsbury was on our first, on our first list. They were one of the ones that, outside of the big five, they were sort of the big independent publisher that we wanted. I know Bloomsbury's independent, but they have a UK division. They're in India. They're pretty massive. So I was really excited when we got the call that Bloomsbury was interested. And it's funny because some of the big publishers that rejected the book, they said that they didn't like the book because it was too heavy, and they thought that it would have been better if it was nonfiction. And so I had that freak out moment where it was like, oh, maybe I should have written a nonfiction
memoir.
book.
Well, actually, you've been posting stuff on your Facebook page, some articles you've written recently, and you were a corrections officer, and this book is loosely based on some of your experiences. Is that accurate to say?
Yes.
And you've been writing now about your experiences as a corrections officer. I saw at least one article on this topic, right?
Yeah, I've written about 3 essays, sort of as promotional material, but also just, talking about my experiences there.
Yeah. Hey, do you worry about being pigeonholed in that way, like being the corrections officer guy, or is it like, this is my turf, this is what I know, I'm going to stick with it?
No, I'm moving on. I've already finished another manuscript.
Okay.
That has nothing to do with the jail. I sort of wanted to get this book out of the way, which is kind of a weird thing, because when I first started writing, I had mentors tell me, why aren't you writing about the jail? You need to write about the jail. And I kind of didn't want to. And just because, it was difficult to return back to that job. I did not like working there.
Sure.
And so to do every day 3 or 4 hours of writing about the jail was tough.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad I wrote the book. I think it came out the way I envisioned it. And even writing the nonfiction essays, I think those have been great because I sort of hid behind the fiction label to be able to tell a lot of the stories that and the people that I met and the people I worked with. I could just change their names, change some of the details of the story, and call it fiction. And I think I was afraid of writing nonfiction because I didn't want it to be like an expose. That's not what I was trying to do.
Sure. Hey, so you're a pretty athletic looking guy. You're a young guy, and you cover this to a certain extent in the nonfiction writing you've been doing. Is this idea of like masculinity, right? And I was thinking about this when I was reading the novel and your nonfiction. Also, kind of thinking about who the big male literary figures are in our region, the kind of Kerouac types. Who there can be this kind of like macho, like street fighting aspect, and you're writing about a prison. And I'm wondering, and it's almost my sense from the novel that you were usurping those notions. You were undercutting those kind of standard notions of being like a male writer. Was that something you're consciously doing? Am I onto something there, or am I way off?
You're onto something. I think this book deals a lot with masculinity, and the fight is, I think you're talking about, like Andre the Buse and Towney, right? It's all about sort of how he used writing to sort of suppress his violent nature. And it gave him an outlet. And I think, when I worked at the jail, I was writing poetry and some short stories, but I didn't tell anyone that I worked with that I was writing poetry. That would have ruined me.
But you also, and you wrote about this in one of your articles, you also had a shaved head. You were, lifting weights a lot, and you physically presented as someone who was willing to throw down. At the same time, you kind of, you said in the article, I think, that you were terrified throughout parts of this experience.
Yes, and I think, there's only so much of the physical appearance you can change, but psychologically, a lot of times I was afraid. I didn't want to go to work, and it's not just about violence. I was afraid of getting a disease. There was a lot of bodily fluids that would be thrown around. And so a lot of the fear was just the entire environment being there every single day. And there's only so much a shaved head and bicep curls can do for that. Sure.
Do you think politically about the prison system? Do you think, or did your experience show you ways that it ought to be reformed, or think of like key areas that really needed to be changed? Like what was the worst stuff you saw?
The worst stuff I saw was how the state of New Hampshire was using the county jail as a mental institution. So a lot of people that needed serious psychological help were thrown into a jail cell, and it only exacerbated their sort of mental illness. We weren't trained as counselors, so I think a lot of that has changed. I think we've learned from that, but there's also what I would like to see is correctional officers get more support. It's a very difficult job, and sort of, after we saw a tough event or someone die, there was no one to sort of talk to after that. It was just toughen up, go home, come back tomorrow like nothing happened. And I still have dreams about the jail, and I haven't been there for almost a decade. So I think that needs to be addressed, the mental health of the officers.
So why did you go into that profession, given that you were writing and interested in poetry and you had this kind of internal creative life at the time?
Well, I failed out of college after 2 semesters.
Where was that? Where'd you go?
I went to Salem State and I was studying English.
Okay.
I wanted to be a high school English teacher and writer.
Yeah.
And I lived with my three best friends in a dorm room. No one told us that was a bad idea, but it was a really bad idea.
Yeah.
And so after that, I was kind of floundering.
So wait, so you dropped out because you were like partying too much and
Yeah, I had like a 1.4 GPA.
Okay.
I was asked not to come back.
Sure. But I'm just wondering if part of that is also literary. I mean, because there just seem to be, not to mention Kerouac again, but there seem to be a number of different writers who have adopted this kind of rebellious persona, and they're heavy drinkers, and they kind of do what they want to do, and they don't necessarily fit in. And you were writing at the time, you wanted to be an English teacher. Were your literary heroes also leading that kind of life? Like were your virtual mentors almost kind of giving you the go-ahead to lead that kind of life in college?
Yeah, I was reading, I think the first book that made me want to write was Hot Water Music by Charles Bukowski.
Yeah.
And so talk about the literary mentor you don't want to have as as an 18-year-old man. And I think I talk about this a lot with my students. There's this idea of like the Hemingway, write while drunk, edit sober, right? And that sort of thing. And I think I wasted a good 6 years of writing drunk.
Yeah.
There's nothing good comes out of that. I think that's a myth. I wonder exactly how much of that Hemingway was sort of just, a persona he put on. But Bukowski was a real drink while you write, and it shows in his writing. I recently have been reading some of his early short stories, and they're not very good.
Yeah. It's funny because I went through a Bukowski phase when I was young, and then I've gone back and forth, and I find some of his prose works and his novels and his short stories fantastic. I was really surprised by how much I liked them because I expected them to be a lot worse, and it was almost like I'd forgotten that the guy could actually write, and just thought of him as this kind of like just fantasy figure or something. But if you like that kind of John Fonte, even like Orwell, like some of his stuff reminds me of the pre-1984 type of Orwell writing, just like very straightforward. Like he knew how to write with a kind of directness and with a kind of humor, and I think sometimes people forget that. I haven't read the early stories in a while. So I go back and forth with Bukowski, although I completely agree with you that the lifestyle is dangerous. I mean, you think of how many people were inspired to get into writing because of somebody like Bukowski, but how many people were ruined by that too, right? Never able to find their own voice, or they began to love alcohol more than they loved literature. For people who don't know Charles Bukowski, he was sort of a famous drunk. He was a famous drunk poet and writer. There's a movie called Barfly with Mickey Rourke that was made loosely about his life. And there's a documentary, I think it's probably still on Netflix, and worth looking into, and inspired many cigarette smoking, Lone Star beer drinking young men, at a certain time. So anyway, tell me about, these are your roots. Before I get into your book, I'm just kind of curious about where you're at now. Do you read a lot of contemporary fiction? Do you read classic fiction? Like where you find your influences these days?
I'm mostly reading contemporary fiction. I went through a phase where I only read dead authors.
Yeah.
And I think that's another trap you can fall into. It's sort of, I was reading a lot of Faulkner, and it just, I needed to read something that was being published today. And I think a lot of young writers and newer writers should do that. It's good to read the classics to understand how novels work, short stories work. But it's also good to see what's being published if you want to be published traditionally today.
Is there a benefit to it beyond learning the scene? In other words, there's a benefit to reading contemporary writers that goes beyond just seeing what other people are up to now and dealing with our world the way it is right now.
Yeah, I think you can also read, not just white men. I think a lot of the canon for so long has been that. And now we're seeing different voices, especially in Western literature, being published. And so I think it's good to open up. When I was doing my master's, my first mentor, she asked me to make a reading list, and I did. and it was just all white men. And I didn't do that on purpose. I just went back to what I'm comfortable reading, what I was taught in, in my undergrad. And she scrapped the list and gave me all writers I've never heard of. I had to Google them all. But it really opened me up. It helped me sort of get out of my tendencies.
Yeah.
And it's something now that I still turn to. I buy a book that I tend to not read, and then I force myself to read it, and I end up loving it.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, this is this problem with literature in general is there's this mystique around certain writers, and you're somehow supposed to like them, and they're kind of like a magnet for our attention. And all these other creative, like wonderful people doing work all around us, and we ignore them. They don't have that mystique. They don't have that patina. You actually read their works and you find out it's fantastic, and you have an equally profound reading experience with them. But because of marketing and because of time and because of all these other factors, including sexism, including some of the stuff you talked about, they just don't have that veneer. And it's really tough for people to get past that, particularly when so many other things are vying for your attention, right? Because when you're a writer right now, it's not like Hemingway. Hemingway, at a certain point, he was competing with television, but not in the same way people are. And he certainly wasn't competing with cell phones, right? So now there's just a smaller amount of people's entertainment, leisure time that can be spent on reading novels.
Yeah, and I think that was sort of why I turned to writing short stories, because I felt like that was going to be a new trend, especially with, diminishing attention spans. People would like to read, something in 10 or 15 minutes instead of a novel that might take longer. But then I also find that people do like something that's 300 pages. It's just like watching a Netflix show that's only 8 episodes in one season, and then it's over and people are like, oh, I wish there was more.
Yeah,
I feel like that's the same with a novel. You don't want it to end sometime.
Yeah, you want to live with those characters. So I know your brain is in some ways elsewhere. One, because you just finished your semester. I've been referring to you in some of the promotional materials as a UML professor, but right now you're now a professor at Southern New Hampshire University, right?
Yes.
And you just wound up your semester.
Yes, we finished last week. Grades are posted.
Yeah, you have kids, right, of your own?
Yeah, I have 2. My daughter's 8 and my son's 5.
So as you were working on your new novel and as you were working on this, you're teaching and you're raising 2 kids. Where do you find your balance?
Yeah, that's been tough. When I wrote Barker House, it was during my MFA and my master's program. And so that sort of gave me an excuse to go hide because it was homework, right? I was working towards the program. So it allowed me to carve out, 2 or 3 hours a day. And now it's sort of like I have to really steal that time. I'm getting back into a rhythm now that the semester's over. So I try to write, between 500 and 700 words, five times a week. It doesn't always get there, but as long as I'm sort of back at the story or back at the book. But it's really hard. I think teaching, especially teaching writing, is so time consuming. I read, close to 200 pages a week of student work and critique it. So it's really hard to be able to find that time, which I didn't ever think about before I started teaching. I just had this idea of, I'll teach them how to write a story, and then I'll go write my story, and you become an editor, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah, a lot of work if you're going to do it right. And it sounds like you care about your students and you like working with students, or you wouldn't be thinking of it this way, right?
Yeah, it's definitely my dream job.
Do you get inspiration from students? Do you start to get ideas or see things? Or does it really feel more like a mentorship relationship?
I think it depends on the student and how invested they are. I have a lot of students that, are taking creative writing, but their main focus is literature. And so creative writing is just a class they have to get through. I'm inspired by the writers who are majoring in creative writing, and this is their passion. And I tell them the sort of best thing I can say to you is, I wish I came up with this idea. When a student really just lands on some fascinating idea and executing it well, I think that's what inspires me. Just the creativity and the imagination
Sure. So we've been talking about this book. There's a lot of people listening right now who don't know anything about this book. What can you tell them? What's this book about?
So this book is about 9 people that work at a county jail in New Hampshire. It takes place in Hillsborough County, but we're calling it Barker County in the book. But if anyone knows New Hampshire, Manchester is named Nashua. And it follows their lives for 1 year on the job. And every single story is from the point of view of someone that works at the jail. So a lot of prison literature is from the prisoner's point of view. And this was sort of a way to enter that genre in a different way, to tell the other side story. And I see a lot of people say that it's unsympathetic, and that was sort of the goal. I didn't want this to be like explaining why CEOs do bad things to inmates. I think we can all imagine why that happens. But I just wanted to show a sort of honest look at their job and their daily lives.
I guess it's funny to me that they would see that as unsympathetic, maybe unflattering. But I don't get a lack of sympathy at all. I mean, I get this feeling like you're really trying to dig into the inner lives of the character. I mean, you can't do that without some exercise of empathy.
Yeah, and I do feel bad for some of the characters, and when I was writing it, I really worried for them. It's kind of, I'm one of the writers that believes characters are real. I have dreams about my characters. Once I start writing them, they become real people to me. They talk to me, and and some of the times I would really worry for some of them.
Well, I think that comes across in the writing. I think it's very character driven, and you do start to kind of, and I think I hinted this in the review, and maybe I did kind of a short review for 8 Great Things to Do at the beginning of the crisis. We do this thing on Thursdays, 8 Great Things to Do this weekend. And when the crisis hit, nobody could leave. So one of the first things we did was 8 great books to do. So we mentioned Barker House there. It was like these not letting the drama come, like there is violence in the book, right? There is aggression and there's tension, but not letting all the drama come from that. Also just coming from like the everyday tensions that have to do with getting enough like psychological energy to make it into work, right? Eating right, avoiding alcohol or dealing with substance abuse problems. There are all sorts of these sort of tensions that are very internal, right? Was that intentional for you? Did you have to decide this is where the drama is going to come from here, and it's going to come from the interior lives of the characters?
Yes, and I write character driven fiction. I always start with character first, and it was easy for this because I knew the setting. But my wife always said that whenever I talked about the jail, the most interesting thing was what people bring home with them. And we always were told, leave your baggage at the door before you come in, and no one ever told us to leave the baggage at the door when we leave. You bring that kind of work home with you. You bring it when you're in the grocery store, and so I wanted to show sort of how even though the officers get to leave every day, they almost never leave. It's always sort of part of them.
Yeah. So sometimes you're sort of mentioned, and maybe it's just a marketing thing, as someone who was mentored by Andre Dubus III. What was your relationship? What is your relationship with Andre?
So he was my first fiction teacher at UMass Lowell. And, I was an older student when I went back to school. I was 27, 28 when I had him. And, he always tells the joke. We're still friends. And he always tells the joke that he saw me sitting there with my tight T-shirt and baseball hat, Red Sox hat. And he said, oh, great. Another guy that's, he's not going to be that great of a writer. And, he already made up this idea of me. And then when he read my fiction, he was really excited. I think he high-fived me during a workshop. And so we kind of hit it off from there. And, he's been sort of my literary father. He's sort of helped me, get over, the thing he said was a lot of writers he knew were great writers, but they stopped writing because they couldn't get their butts in the seat. And so he always pushed me to, don't quit on this. You're good at it, kind of thing. And sometimes I needed to hear that, and I still do.
Sure. Hey, did you think as you were writing this about being a regional writer? In other words, like you chose subject matter that was located around here, right? And the Merrimack Valley isn't a place you see in a lot of literary fiction. Is that an accident? Is that like, well, these are my experience and this is what I was drawing from? Or in other words, were you conscious of this kind of a sense of place when you started work on this novel?
I did. And I was reading Andre Debuss's father, who was a short story writer. And one of the times I was reading it and I saw Haverhill, Mass in one of the stories. And I thought, you can write a story about Haverhill? And it was like, you can, right? Not everything has to take place in Los Angeles, New York City. We can write about this region. And my next book that I just finished is called The River is a Man. And it's all about people and their lives in the Merrimack River.
Really? Okay, so that was kind of my next question, right? Is what's going on with the next book, and is it going to be a science fiction novel, or so you're staying with literary fiction and you're staying with the Merrimack Valley? Yes,
very much so. It takes place in Lowell, Tingsboro, Nashua. It takes right up the Merrimack, and I love this place. I've lived in Lowell my entire life. I still live in Lowell up on Christian Hill. I can see the river from where I'm sitting. And, I think we have something unique here, not just with our accents, right? I always get sort of where you're from. But I don't know, there's just something about this river and what it means to the city and why the city is even here and how it's changed, how we treat it now. So I wanted to sort of, I also was sick of writing about the jail. There's only so many ways you can describe a concrete wall. And,
Do people keep writing to you looking for kind of jail writing? Do you get pitches for that a lot?
Yeah, that's basically all I'm getting.
But, and are you at the point where you can say, no, thank you. I got other stuff going on.
Yeah. So this next book is a book of short stories, and my agent is already shopping them, and so we're already sort of moving past. We're moving past the jail.
Okay. Hey, so how does I don't know how that works. You say your agent is shopping them. Does that mean this? So it's not like Bloomsbury contracts you for a certain number of books?
No, they bought the rights to this book and only this book.
Okay.
But they also, so if we wanted to, we could go back to Bloomsbury and try to shop it to the same editor, and because I have a good relationship with her. But she also might say, no thanks. We loved your last book. We don't like this one. There's no guarantee that I'll just keep publishing with them.
Yeah. So do you have to think about that during the creative process too? Like, do you have the added anxiety of, I'm going to be putting my heart into this thing, and what if nobody bites on it?
Yeah, I didn't do that with Barker House because I never thought anyone this would never see the light of day.
Yeah.
And I was really just writing it as my thesis for my master's. And, I started querying agents in my third semester, and, I got an agent, and then I sold the book pretty fast. So it was something that I never thought anyone would see. Yeah. And I think that was a safe place to be writing from.
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
What was that like then? What was that like then to find out? Because that's a phenomenal achievement, right? To have something come out, your first novel to come out on Bloomsbury. What did you believe it at first? Was it like, how did you handle that emotionally?
Yeah, I thought it was sort of, I talked to the editor and the team over the phone, and then, I hung up and I thought, oh, I don't know if they like me or not. I can't tell. And then sort of a few days went by and my agent didn't hear from them, and we kind of freaked out. And it was right around Memorial Day. And she said, you know what, let's just let's just tell them that we need an answer before the long weekend. And within a couple hours, she called me and said, we have an offer. And I pretty much freaked out. And she's like, I'm going to send the counter offer. I said, no, just take the offer. don't play games with this. But it was pretty surreal to see, I went to New York City and I went to their offices, and, I never thought I'd even ever be walking down in Manhattan. I just didn't see myself doing that, and with a sports jacket on. And so it's just the whole thing felt like, it wasn't happening to me, but
sure.
It's been great.
So I have a question before. I always ask Lou if he has questions, so I'm gonna turn it over to Lou in a second. But I wanted to ask you something. I also noticed on your Facebook page that you were looking to get your hands on some weights, and I've had a hard time. Like, I've been trying to get back in shape, and everything's sold out everywhere. I was trying to get some kettlebells, and you can't get kettlebells. Kettlebells. People talk about toilet paper. The great thing you cannot get. Right. The thing most people are hoarding is kettlebells and dumbbells and weightlifting equipment. Were you ever able to get any equipment?
No, I have not gotten any.
Okay. So people in the comments section, if you have extra weight equipment for David, please let him know, because the man needs some gear.
Yes, and be reasonable about your prices. Jeez, the going rate used to be $1 a pound, and now it's like $3 a pound.
It's insane. It's insane. I got lucky, and a friend of mine had an extra kettlebell, so I picked that up last night. But I remember reading that and kind of thinking it was funny, but I didn't realize the situation until I started to go shopping and saw people selling used weights on the internet for crazy prices.
Yeah, and I've been working out 5 days a week for 10 years, and now I've gone 6 weeks, and it happens pretty quick. I lost, a lot of my strength in just 6 weeks. It's crazy.
I know. It's sad too. All that work disappears so quickly.
Gone.
It's nuts. Lou, do you have any questions for David?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where to start here. Let me take you back to the jail first, David. I'm interested in the short form, your path to becoming a CEO and working in the industry. But the main question is, how did working in the jail change your relationship with humanity? In other words, you saw the dark underside, to use a cliche, of humanity. How does it affect your day-to-day life now going forward?
Well, I know that there's really bad people out there. And that's not sort of, you see crimes in the newspaper and on the news, and it's not until you're feeding that person lunch or you're helping them shave their beard, and the things they say, you realize just how evil they could be. But I also see a lot of people that were wrongly accused, because we were a county jail, so most of the people there were pre-trial or awaiting trial, and so some guys would be there for 18 months, and then they would be found not guilty. And so it made me think a lot about our system. Should somebody sit in jail for 2 years that, and they were just accused. They haven't been sentenced of anything, but we treated them as if they were all guilty. So that was something I struggled with. And so now when I read stuff in the paper or see something in the news, I have that question in my mind of, yeah, but did this person really do it? We always just think, yes, they did it, because they wouldn't have arrested them if they didn't. And so now that's something I'm conscious of.
And you identified one problem in the jails, which is using it as a mental health facility, which obviously it's not designed to do. So that's one of the reforms we could possibly make. If I put you in charge of the jails in New Hampshire today, what would be some of your first reforms? Are there other things we can do, or are we just dealing with people where this is the result of the people that are in the jail?
I think it's tough. I was thinking a lot about this now, especially with COVID-19 being in prisons and jails, and there's a push to let people out, and so it makes me think about the violent crimes and the low-level crimes, and sort of how we're treating that. A lot of the inmates at the jail were probation violations, right? So I think there needs to be something fixed in the court system side. When I teach a class at Middlesex through the Lowell District Court system called Changing Lives Through Literature, and the judge asks, she doesn't sentence them to my class, but she nudges them towards my literature class, and if they take that class, there's leniency on their probation, and they have all their fees waived. And I was wondering what that means, fees. And if somebody's on probation, there's a court fee every month, and if they don't pay it at the end, they can go to jail. So while somebody is on prison, the system is on probation. The system is still, they have their foot on their neck. It's tough to get a job when you're on probation, and you have to pay the court fees. So I think a lot has to do with the money side. I can't tell you how many guys were in the county jail for probation violations. Very simple things.
You also, Andre told you that you were good at writing. Don't give up on this. You're good at it, and now you're teaching it. How does that manifest itself? How can you tell when somebody's good at writing? What does that mean to you?
So I think about it a lot like sports. So there's that you can't teach speed, right? They say a lot.
Yep.
And some people just have speed, but they also now they need to learn how to hit or catch a ball, and I think that's where writing teachers come in. It's sort of to hone the skills of those students that just have that, they were born with that ability to write, and now you just have to help them harness that. And I think that's what I needed too. I needed to, I could write, but I didn't know a lot of the rules of writing. And so, and how to make stories actually work. Like a good idea is a good idea, but how do you make it into a story? So that's what I try to do with my students is I can just tell when a student has the speed, and it's not that you can't learn it, but I can tell when some writers are just faking it, right? They think they know what writing is, and they're trying to mimic that, but some writers just have it.
You have the curse that Doug and I have. You have it too, in that we're all in businesses where people consume books, they consume magazines, they consume radio and interviews, so everybody thinks they know how to do it. So everybody's sitting at home in the quarantine now, and they're thinking, geez, I've had this novel in me for a long time. Maybe now's the time to start. How do you know when you're ready? How do you know when you've got it? What would you say to those people who are thinking, yeah, I can write a novel. Why not? Let's do it.
I would say just go ahead and try it. But I think if you do something like that, you should join a writing group. You should get sort of, a group of people that you can share it with. That way, writing a novel can take 2 years, 3 years. And I think it would be helpful to know along the way if you're doing it right, instead of, spending 2 years on something and then giving it to someone and they're like, what is this? You'd rather hear what is this like 6 weeks in. And this would be a good time too to do sort of a writing group, especially if everyone's stuck at home. You can do these Zoom things where you share pages, because I rely on my readers, my friends who I met through, various stages of the writing life. They're the first people who see my work, and it feels good for them to say, what is this? And then I have to go back and rework it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on with us. That was really great. I hope people buy the book. Buy the book, please, everybody. Go out and order it. Go over to Amazon and pick up a copy. Support local writers. It's really, really great. Look for the new Merrimack Valley magazine, and you can read my take on the book. What I wanted to mention, we have another person who is completely 100% content being a cultural figure in Lowell. Melvin Taylor, who's a musician, is going to be on next week, and we're going to be doing some songs. So I hope everybody turns in then. Once again, thank you, Lou. Dave, thanks so much. That was really fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. Thank you, Lou. That was great.
All right. Right on.